Hi, it's Arjun. We are again in the midst of a pretty heavy travel schedule, so this is going to be a very quick video. I don't have the majestic Rocky Mountains in my background. Hopefully this background's okay. Really want to touch upon three key points this week. I think the first is really, we've had a couple of energy outlooks published from some of the larger companies, and we'd highlighted that these outlooks were going to be coming out. Would they signify a change from kind of the energy transition narrative, that very narrow definition we had over the last few years, and how would they evolve? And I'll provide some commentary on that. Number two, we continue to believe energy sources should not have any political affiliation to them. It shouldn't be that one party in the US likes one set of energy sources and another party likes another. It makes no sense. And I think when you depoliticize energy, I think it can let you look through some of the data points and new items through a fresh lens. So I'll give maybe a couple contrarian takes on some recent news items. And then lastly, we've been pushing back on the oil glut narrative, and we just want to provide some additional context on sort of why we think focusing on this very near term, how bearish I think it's going to get type viewpoint that so many people seem to have, I think it really does miss the bigger picture. So first, let me talk about some of these energy outlooks that have come out here in the fall and over the last little bit from especially a couple of the larger oil companies. We're still waiting on the IEA's World Energy Outlook update. And, we have pushed back hard, as you all know, is the reason we started Super-Spiked, on that sort of the energy transition narrative that said we're going to get out of fossil fuels, go only into renewables, these net zero scenarios. We've never believed in any of it. And I think we were wondering, as the world has seen how off base those narratives of the last few years were, how would things change? And I think we're actually going to maybe put a little bit of a pause on how much weight we put on any of these scenarios that come out. They all seem to be being sort of marked to market under, I'm going to call it a political lens, meaning if a few years ago, the right political call was to call for a very aggressive energy transition narrative. Now there's all this talk about pragmatism and realism. And so you're seeing people push out things like peak oil demand, but only maybe modestly adjusting their view. I think you do have to start to really wonder, are people like me then putting too much emphasis on all these macro scenarios that are published? Are they not just perhaps political documents? And I think one of the tells is actually the coal numbers. It is really easy for a high-profile macro agency or any of the larger oil companies that publish these things to just assume coal falls off a cliff. Now, we can have a view on whether it can or will or should. The idea that it's going to, I've always said it's probably one of the worst assumptions in most net zero models. So at least in terms of trying to assess, is an energy outlook kind of worth spending time on? Look at the coal assumption. If they got that thing peaking and falling off a cliff, it's often a very convenient assumption to make. And I'm going to really push back hard that when you look at the outlook for China, when you look at India and other developing regions that in many cases have a lot of coal resources and aren't currently using a lot of energy, I'm going to really question why anyone thinks coal demand, as an example, is going to fall off a cliff in some near-term way. And so this sort of politicization, maybe it's always been there and we just didn't care or notice before. I think really kind of means that there's a devaluation of a lot of these energy macro scenarios. Our starting point in a scenario we have not seen is, why doesn't anyone model what energy sources and uses of demand look like in a world where everybody is energy rich? Not just the lucky 1 billion of us, but all 8 billion people, soon to be 9, soon to be 10 billion people on Earth. We can debate the decade. We can debate which countries perhaps never get there. But we know it is the aspiration for everyone else on Earth. And we also, I think, can have some confidence that those 4 billion plus people in Asia, China, India, rest of Southeast Asia, are certainly making progress up economic and energy S-curves. And I think for the first time, we're seeing some green shoots in some of the African countries where their demand numbers are starting to become more noticeable. And never mind the Middle East, Latin America, and other places that are also moving up and to the right. And so if I'm looking at energy scenarios, if I want to take them seriously, I think, again, the tell is going to be on the coal assumption from others. I think for myself, we'd like to see the scenarios modeled where that prioritization of economic well-being, which is what everyone strives for, and which is why we use energy in the first place. Let's see that model, and then let's decide what are the pragmatic realities of what that might imply, say, for crude oil imports for some resource-poor countries. What might that assume for renewables penetration? What is a healthy level? What makes sense? How good are they in terms of being able to receive or see any of these metrics? So, we might take a little bit of a timeout on some of these scenarios. If they're just political mark-to-markets, not really sure what the value is. Second key point. Our view is that energy sources should not have a political home team, if you will. It shouldn't be that, say, in the US, Republicans like oil and gas and hate renewables and vice versa for Democrats. Does not make sense. I think when we depoliticize these energy sources and we don't try and put our own biases into what we like and don't like, how can that help us better analyze and interpret data points? So as an example, there's a headline now about China dumping, or at least selling at very low prices, things like renewables to the various African countries. And I'm going to say that this has unquestionably been, I think, a very good thing. If you can give the people of Africa access to energy, whatever its form, that is just full stop an absolutely good thing. What I suspect is, if they're getting access to electricity that they didn't have before, whether it's solar or whether it's something else, it is stimulating economic activity. For the first time, the oil demand numbers are becoming noticeable. So when you have people who previously didn't have electricity now have it, they're able to engage in broader economic activity. Now, I will say that I do not have the stats, I've not done the numbers yet, to say specifically by growing their electricity grid, by adding solar, if that's what it is, that's leading to more oil demand. But it is not a coincidence that, to the extent generation capacity is going up in these countries, it's leading to broad-based energy activity. Remember, individual people could care less what their energy source is. All they care is once they have it, it enables other forms of economic activity. And I suspect some of the positiveness that we're seeing in the African oil demand numbers are a direct function of some enhancement to the electricity grids. By the same token, there's a lot of rightful enthusiasm about AI data centers and what it's going to mean for the power sector and some of the various energy sources, whether it's natural gas or nuclear, maybe geothermal, or of course, solar with batteries and so forth. People are positive on all that. But that is also an enabler of broad-based economic activity. And I suspect some of the generally healthier oil demand numbers we're seeing is also a function of things like this AI hyperscale and data center build out. So all these things go together. I implore everyone to not take political angles to your energy sources. And I think it can help lead to, different conclusions on what some of these headlines and data points mean. A third headline that we saw recently was that Pakistan was not going to be taking as much LNG because they've had enough solar expansion. Now, first of all, if Pakistan is expanding their electricity grid through solar, the fact that they have more electricity generation, unquestionably a good thing. If LNG has been too expensive for them, I can see how price competition is a reality of that market. But when I look at how little energy Pakistan currently uses, the idea that they're going to write off any individual fuel, least of all LNG, for the rest of the time, it's simply laughable. And again, when people have sort of an ideological angle to them, I'm a believer in the energy transition, and I think solar and batteries are the winner, and therefore Pakistan, look at them, they've vowed off LNG. Let's just see how that lasts. They're using a fraction of the energy that even India does, let alone richer countries like China or Thailand, or of course America or South Korea or Canada or anywhere else. So I suspect Pakistan, like most places, will ultimately be using all forms of energy, and all forms of energy ultimately enable the kind of economic development we know they're going to want to have. I think the third and final point we want to make is that I know we keep coming back to it, but it's this pervasive sort of near-term oil bearishness narrative. And I think we do have to put some qualification on it. I think there probably are some people who are truly structurally bearish oil. They might be in the peak demand category or just think supply is going to continue to grow. But I do notice that you hear a lot of people talking about being bearish for the period of time now, but at some time within a year or two, perhaps the bull market will return. I think I have to give credit to my friend and technically a former competitor, Paul Sankey, for his line that the classic Wall Street view is you're bearish or concerned short term, but you're bullish long term. And I think we're seeing a lot of that kind of talk here in oil markets. And the point we make is oil prices are down $60 a barrel from their 2022 peak. We've had the bulk of the downside. We've got a sector that is currently under earning. We've got absolute and growth rates in demand that are unquestionably higher than what consensus has feared, even if you don't take the OPEC research numbers that we think are closer to the truth. Never mind that there are discrepancies in these absolute numbers, that the numbers foot better to what you're seeing in OPEC research. We are seeing not just things like drone strikes in a place like Russia, but perhaps, maybe just perhaps, some signs of maturity. We're seeing a number of these sort of OPEC plus countries clearly being at their limits in terms of production capacity. We're seeing the sector under-earning. That's our view in terms of where they are on the profitability outlook. We're seeing companies taking cost-cutting actions as if we were already at the trough of the cycle. So I always accept calling the precise bottom is very difficult. But this idea, this sort of very bearish gloom that people have for the oil sector, I don't get it. The demand numbers actually look okay. We've had the bulk of the downdraft, even if it does by some chance get a little worse from here. We're not expecting that. Many people are. We shall see. But you've had the bulk of the downturn. This sector currently is a 3% S&P market cap weighting. Its energy weighting is 5% at a time. At a time, it's under-earning slightly. What that means is those numbers should be in line. And I will say the 3% market weighting today should be 5%. What is the relevance of fighting over the last $5 or $10 or $15? And as you know, these types of comments are not geared for investors. We don't make investment calls at Veriten or at Super-Spiked. And it is geared for the companies. What are the actions they should be taking to think about what I think is a pretty bright future for the sector, in contrast to what is a lot of gloom right now. So we'll end this video on a personal note. While we do not believe there should be a home team, so to speak, when it comes to your energy sources, this should absolutely be depoliticized. Sadly, our home team, New York Yankees, did lose last night to the Toronto Blue Jays. I know many of you, especially those of you from Houston, are crushed to hear that news. We are still living through this Cashman-Boone regime. I don't know why we still are, but we are. But we can be thankful that we have Big Ten football and Big 12 football to look forward to. I think it's going to be a decent year for the Knicks, so we're going to be hopeful about that. And at least we got some things to look forward to despite another long Yankees offseason. Thank you.